what I have to say about this, obviously, I mean, I've been involved in some protest groups as well. I'm a very political individual, and I'm very much an activist myself. I am pro-human rights. Whatever place of the spectrum you want to place me on, folks, go ahead, place me wherever you want. I really don't affiliate with any particular side of the spectrum, but this is what I have to say about it. I think that it is absolutely absurd that our country has the ability to take a dump on peaceful protesters and absolutely stomp all over them and basically deter them from being able to utilize their own rights as written by supreme federal law. So, Thomas, how does this feel? There's numerous occasions so far, not just the G20, but now more recently, 250 youth protesters in Quebec who were putting up a peaceful protest against the hike in student tuitions, who, under this new legislation, were arrested and detained without proper cause. It was declared an illegal protest. And also another protest here recently last week in Ontario, where again they declared it an illegal protest and began arresting protesters who were not behaving in a violent way.
Well, that's a good question. Let me ask you a question. Do you know the criteria for an illegal protest?
Well, no, nobody really does at this point. I mean, where do we find this criteria?
That's the issue. What's the criteria for an illegal protest? You know what the criteria is? If I'm a cop and I say it's an illegal protest, it's an illegal protest.
Well, not just a cop, but even a government official, somebody from the Harper government can say, oh, well, my radio show is a protest. Let's shut him down because he's protesting the way we are doing things here at the Harper government. So, I mean, just even now overstepping the bounds with this new legislation that's in place, obviously my freedom of speech can be taken away in a heartbeat if they so choose to, by shutting down a radio show that's just simply trying to express a political viewpoint.
Well, that's just it. Under the Harper government, under this Bill 78, effectively, the fact that we are speaking out against the government, we could be considered terrorists and we could be considered essentially illegal protesters. Why? Because we oppose the government agenda. We have a government agenda right now that insists on a dictatorship, and that dictatorship attitude basically says, you know what, if you don't side with my policies, you're illegal, and I can arrest you and detain you for as long as I want to. That's the new government system that we're under. There's these 250 protesters in Quebec. They're students who are protesting tuition hikes, and I commend them for that. Education is becoming very unaffordable and quickly, and you know what? Education is a right. It's not a privilege. And so, there needs to be, yes, I believe that there needs to be a certain fee for going to school, but that it shouldn't cost you a life savings. You shouldn't have to save your whole life just to get a post-secondary education. I disagree with that. And, that's what these students are protesting, is saying, look, I remember seeing a sign on Facebook, this woman holding up a sign saying education should not be a debt sentence, and that's exactly what it is. It's indebting students for life, and I disagree with that idea, and that's what they're protesting, and I commend them for that. But guess what? That doesn't go with the corporate power, and so they're saying, well, we don't agree with that, so we're going to declare you illegal.
Obviously, the powers that be are trying to keep at bay the fact that they're profiting exponentially right now from tuition, not only in Quebec but in other provinces. And the whole education system has gone from being an education, a place to learn and develop and grow, to becoming just strictly a business. It's a place where they brainwash you and expect you to line their pocketbooks while they brainwash you. I mean, what's really left for students, and why is it that we can't even speak our minds anymore without being criticized or labeled potential terrorists?
Well, that's the transition from sort of the late 80s till now, in the last sort of 22 years roughly. When I was a kid, this wasn't an issue. And, my grandfather taught me to, he says, you set your eye on something, you just go and do it. But you see, back in his generation, you didn't need expensive education. His father taught him how to do something, and he pursued it, and that should be how it works. But now it's just like, you go to a job, it's just like, do you have a degree in this? Do you have a degree in that? It's all about post-secondary. Post-secondary, honestly, to me, is starting to become like the banks. It is like the next best scam. It really is. Now, granted, I will say this. Granted that there are some courses that you can't get rid of, like healthcare, for example. Healthcare is essential to our society. You can't get rid of that. But you, the problem is that we have a system now that perpetuates this idea that you have to go to post-secondary in order to be successful. That's not true.
Well, I mean, I got to play the devil's advocate, as you said. Obviously, there's going to be some situations that require you to have an education because, let's face it, I can't walk into a doctor's office or a hospital and say, "Hi, I'm a surgeon," cut somebody open, and obviously expect it to be successful.
Right.
So, I mean, where's the boundary? Where do we draw the line and say, well, obviously you need an education for this, but why the hell do you need an education for that?
Well, that becomes, striking a balance, right? And unfortunately, nowadays they can't seem to figure this out. 20 some odd years ago, this wasn't an issue. It wasn't. But now it's like the system has perpetuated this idea that you must go to school to be successful. And like I say, from what you're saying, the occupation of healthcare, there's many different fields. That is one that is needed. I won't argue that. I don't want someone operating me without a license, but you can't tell me that.
So you wouldn't want me to walk into the hospital and cut you open not knowing anything on it.
Right. I mean, that's something that you do need education for. I'm not disagreeing with that. But for instance, to be an accountant, I know some people who are just math whizzes by trade. That's just what they do. It's what they're good at. So, I mean...
Yeah, but accounting is a prestigious career. I mean, everybody believes it is anyway. Why is it prestigious? Tell me.
I wish I could answer that. I don't know why. It's the same as lawyers. Lawyers, let me attack this one for a minute. Lawyers, you do not need a law degree to know the law. Let me say that right now. You do not need a law degree to know the law. And this is where I'm attacking it from, is you do need to have some kind of certificate in healthcare to work on somebody. Yes. But to know the law, guess what? It's free at the public library. You don't need to have a degree. But you know what? Our system likes to say, well, guess what? You need to go to court and you need to hire a lawyer. Well, why do you need to hire a lawyer for? The judge should know the law. If you don't know the law, the judge should correct you on it.
Well, I mean, it's obvious that there is a very large system bias towards people who don't have an education, especially in the legal system. I mean, let's face it, you don't need a degree to become a prostitute. You just sort of do it by choice and it becomes your trade. So why should any of these professions, I mean, aside from specialized things like, as you said, a doctor or somebody who has, a skill set that needs to be developed and honed in order to be in that trade. I mean, what really is the value of being brainwashed to have an ego?
Well, that's just it. You know what? Honestly, in the many years, I've been doing media work for almost 10 years now, and you know what? I am starting to have a very big distaste for our mainstream media. I've approached them before. I've gone into their studios, and I've said, you know what? I haven't been to school. But I want to learn. And you know what they give me? They basically say, well, that's nice. You have to go to school anyways. Well, why do I have to go to school? Why can't you just show me? See, that's the issue. Why is it that we must go to school to be successful? Here is where I say there is a conspiracy. I'm going to break out the word conspiracy. It is a conspiracy. You want to know why it's a conspiracy? Because guess what? Why is it that I have to go into debt, thousands upon thousands of dollars, just to obtain knowledge that I have a right to, and it's not privileged information? That's the problem. Why are we going into debt so much just to obtain this information? What's really the big thing going on behind closed doors here? One has to wonder.
Well, obviously, it's as you're suggesting, it's beneficial to the higher ups who are it all ties into the banking system. Obviously, they're the ones issuing the loans, which I won't even get into detail of how the financial system works. That's a whole topic for another show altogether. But honestly, I mean, it's come to a point where there has to be a balance. There isn't one. But that brings us to my next. That brings me to a completely different topic altogether. I mean, I ran for politics. I was told that I was not qualified because I didn't have a degree in education. How could I be qualified to make a decision and manage the affairs of our country as a member of parliament in Canada if I don't have a degree? And why is it that people like you and I who want to exercise democratic process and partake in democratic process are being chastised because we don't have a degree in law, a degree in physiology, some fancy doctorate that says I'm entitled to be an asshole?
Thank you for putting it like it is. Honestly, I'm disappointed in the Canadian public for buying into the biggest lie, I would say, almost known to man. the lie that says that you must have a degree to succeed. That's where it all goes back to. And that's completely not the case. I've done almost 10 years of media work, and I have never been in a classroom. I'll say that right now. And you know what? I've had almost nobody criticize the level of my film work. You want to know why? Because I researched it, I practiced it, and I learned it. But I didn't go into debt for it. So does that make me a loser because I didn't go into debt for it? I disagree. But that's the thing, is that I'm disappointed that Canadian public thinks that you must have a degree to be in office. You know what? Many of the people in office before us never had that. And why didn't the Canadian public chastise them?
Well, because obviously some of them did have a degree, but most famously Ralph Klein, the former Premier of Alberta, did not have more than an 8th grade education, and he did more for our province as an individual, as a human being, and somebody who is passionate for the people in our province than any other previous politician in our province has done for the last 40 years.
Well, that's just it.
If bear in mind, I must give exception that Peter Lougheed was also an exceptional premier.
The thing is, what was the first one you mentioned?
Ralph Klein.
Ralph Klein, yes. Grade 8 education. If somebody with a grade 8 education can get this province out of debt, that just proves to you what's really going on in post-secondary schools. Is it really education, or is it brainwashing? I believe it's brainwashing, because honestly, I've actually talked to so many students who believe that they're going somewhere in their careers. Like, oh, I'm getting a nice education. Well, that's interesting. I know many people who haven't got your education. They know more than you do. So how does that work? I honestly believe that school programs students to have an ego, saying, look, I have a piece of paper, I know more than you do, shove it kind of idea.
Yeah, now straying away obviously from the education side of things, more into the political side of things, because we are talking about politics more than the educational side of things right now.
Exactly.
But let's look at the leadership that we have. And let's look at, recent events, particularly Alison Redford right now, Premier of Alberta, has made, with her new budget, there's extreme debate over her decision to reduce the rates and pay of doctors in the province of Alberta and also teachers in the province of Alberta. And her reasoning being that, although they have an education and although they have some entitlement to be paid a little bit more, she believes they're being paid too much, and so she's made a motion to actually reduce their current earnings in order to provide, instead of taking away from the people and raising taxes, she decided to cut wages where they needed to be cut, right around the belt line and the fat of the people who are sitting at the top raking in all the earnings. And obviously she's receiving heavy chastisement for this decision. So tell me, Thomas, why is it that people in political positions who are making decisions for the people, the way they should be making decisions, are being chastised for making those decisions?
Well, first of all, I commend Redford on that one. And to the media who want to make her look like an idiot, shame on you. For all the media outlets. I believe Redford is doing the province of Alberta a very good favor. The fat needs to be trimmed, and honestly, she did say that she was going to do everything she possibly could to avoid more taxes, and that's right. We need to avoid more taxes. We're already taxed enough as it is. Employees right now are taxed 16% at the base level. And that's usually on average about $400, $400 to $600 off of the average paycheck for the lower class. That money, honestly, if they can't make ends meet off of income tax alone, then they need a new financial accountant. Because honestly, the money coming out of that should be able to pay for everything else. But the other side of it is Redford's also picking up the mess of the oil companies. Honestly, we have such good oil revenues in this province, and it's not being used for the right purposes. It's being used to pay CEOs. Well,
obviously, they've got the Heritage Fund implemented by Lougheed, which was intended originally to help stimulate and develop social programs, and that's thanks to some of our previous leaders, such as Mr. Stelmach. That was redirected from its intended purpose, obviously, to just sort of line the pocketbooks of the fat cats and take away from social programs and people that, again, taking away and making decisions that aren't for the people, but for themselves, and sort of a screw the people attitude. Those who made those decisions to actually help the people are being chastised for it. Peter Lougheed was heavily criticized for implementing that program. Alison Redford is being heavily criticized for making decisions for the people. Even the Wild Rose Party, who's known to affiliate conservatively, has chastised the current PC government of Alberta for being too relaxed towards the population in Alberta.
Well,